Greetings, listeners. Have you ever looked at the news or your own life and thought, what is even happening right now? That's how Daniel must have felt. In chapters 7 through 12, he sees terrifying visions of the future, full of chaos and conflict. But in the middle of it all, God sends him a message of comfort. I'm still here. I'm still in control. That's what we're exploring today. Well, welcome everyone. I'm your host, Jackie Adewale, and this is the Bible Basics Podcast, where weekly we break down the basics of the Bible into understandable, bite-sized chunks. Let's start by setting the stage. Last time, in part 1, we met Daniel, the faithful exile from Jerusalem, now working in Babylon's royal courts. But in chapter 7, the tone of the book changes completely. Daniel is no longer in a royal court. He's caught up in a vision. What comes next isn't a record of daily events. It's spiritual truth told through powerful and sometimes strange symbols. From chapters 7 through 12, Daniel receives a series of vivid visions. They don't follow a neat timeline. They bounce between past, present, and future, sometimes all in one scene. But there's one clear thread running through them all. God is still in charge, and his kingdom will outlast every other empire. Each of the 4 visions in the second half of Daniel stands on its own. They tell their own version of the future, but they do overlap. For example, both Daniel 7 and 8 describe a sequence of world empires, while Daniel 9 zooms in on Israel's future and hints at a coming anointed one. Chapters 10 through 12 offer a sweeping, detailed look at political turmoil and spiritual warfare, some of it tied to Daniel's time and some pointing far beyond. Not every vision goes all the way to the end of history, but together they build a layered picture of what's to come. Just a note, if you listened to part 1, you might remember that the book of Daniel switches languages, moving from Hebrew to Aramaic in chapters 2 through 7, then back to Hebrew in chapter 8. Scholars have offered different theories for this bilingual structure. As we discussed in that episode, it might simply reflect Daniel's own background. He was educated in both Hebrew and Aramaic, so the writing may reflect his world. It could also mirror a shift in focus. The Aramaic section deals with the rise and fall of world empires, while these final Hebrew chapters focus in on the future of God's people under those empires. Let's get started with chapter 7. Picture this. The sea is churning. Out of the waves, 4 terrifying beasts rise, each more bizarre than the last. A lion with wings, a bear with ribs in its teeth, a leopard with 4 heads, and then something worse, a beast with iron teeth, 10 horns and eyes like a man. Daniel's first vision is wild, but it's not random. These beasts are widely understood to represent Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. These are powerful kingdoms that will rise and fall on the earth. Suddenly, the scene changes. The chaos of beasts give way to a courtroom in heaven. God himself appears, called the Ancient of Days. He's seated on a throne of fire surrounded by millions of heavenly beings. Judgment begins. The beasts are stripped of their power. And then Daniel sees someone else, quote, one like a son of man. That's in chapter 7, verse 13. He approaches the throne. He's not a beast. He looks human. and he's given glory, authority, and an everlasting kingdom. That's in chapter 7, verse 14. This is the climax of the vision, and it's a turning point in the Bible. Jesus later quotes this exact vision in Matthew 26, verse 64, calling himself the, quote, Son of Man, unquote. That's not just a humble title. It's a direct reference to Daniel 7:13. Jesus was claiming to be the one who receives eternal rule from the Ancient of Days. That's why Daniel 7 is considered a cornerstone of apocalyptic literature. Not because it's about predicting the future in detail, but because it pulls back the curtain. It shows us what's really going on behind the rise and fall of empires. It tells us that no matter how dark things get, God is still on the throne, and his kingdom, through the Son of Man, will never end. The vision ends with this hope-filled promise. Quote, "Then the sovereignty, power, and greatness of all the kingdoms under heaven will be handed over to the holy people of the Most High, and his kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom." That's chapter 7, verse 27. Now in Daniel 8, the prophet sees another vision, this time in the city of Susa. He watches as a ram with two horns charges across the land, symbolizing the Medo-Persian Empire. Then suddenly, a goat with a single sharp horn rushes in from the west and strikes the ram down. Theologians believe that goat is Greece, and its large horn represents Alexander the Great. But the big horn breaks off, and four smaller horns grow in its place, mirroring the four generals who divided Alexander's empire. Then comes a small but fierce horn, widely linked to Antiochus Epiphanes, a ruler who would desecrate the Jewish temple and persecute God's people. Daniel overhears two holy ones speaking. One asks, "How long would this vision last?" The reply, 2,300 evenings and mornings. Then the sanctuary will be reconsecrated. That's chapter 8, verse 14. This connects with the historical rededication of the temple that's celebrated during Hanukkah. Daniel is shaken, feeling overwhelmed. Then the angel Gabriel appears, sent to help him understand. He explains the vision points toward the time of the end. And though this evil ruler will rise, quote, he will be destroyed, not by human power. That's chapter 8, verse 25. So the message? Persecution may come, but it has an end. The sanctuary, God's holy place that was defiled, it'll be restored. Daniel 9 opens not with a vision, but with a prayer. Daniel recounts the words of the prophet Jeremiah, who had said the exile would last 70 years. Deeply burdened, Daniel turns to God with fasting and confession, realizing that time is almost up. Daniel doesn't just sit back and wait. He prays. He fasts, puts on sackcloth and ashes, and pours out one of the most heartfelt prayers in all of Scripture. That's chapter 9, verses 4 through 19. So what does Daniel actually ask for? Well, he confesses the sins of Israel again and again and pleads with God to show mercy. Specifically, he asks God to turn away his anger, to forgive his people, to restore Jerusalem and the temple, which lie in ruins, and above all, to act for the sake of his name. He cries out, "Lord, listen. Lord, forgive. Lord, hear and act. For your sake, my God, do not delay, because your city and your people bear your name. And while Daniel is still praying, before he even finishes, Gabriel shows up with an answer. But the answer goes beyond just the return from exile. Gabriel reveals something bigger, a long-term plan for God's people and God's city. Here's what Gabriel says will happen during that period. There are 3 points that are related to sin, and that's first, the end of rebellion, the end of sin, and the atonement of the wicked. The other 3 points are related to righteousness, the bringing in of everlasting righteousness, the sealing up of vision and prophecy, and the anointing of the most holy place. Then in verse 25, the angel goes on to say, quote, from the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the anointed one, the Messiah, comes, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens, unquote. That timeline, the math, and the exact fulfillment, scholars debate. Some see it pointing exactly to the coming of Christ. Others connect it to events surrounding Jerusalem's destruction in 70 AD. Still others think it has layers, both near and far future. But here's the heart of it. God is not winging it. He has a plan, and it leads to redemption. Daniel's final vision stretches across chapters 10 through 12, and it's the longest, most intense one yet. It begins in chapter 10. Daniel has been mourning and fasting for 3 weeks when a radiant figure appears before him, so dazzling that Daniel falls to the ground in fear. This figure is described as being dressed in linen with a belt of gold, a face like lightning, eyes like flames, and a voice like a roaring crowd. This kind of description shows up in other parts of the Bible too, like in Ezekiel 1 or Revelation 1, where heavenly or divine messengers appear in overwhelming glory. Then comes the message. In chapters 11 and 12, an angel tells Daniel about a long series of future conflicts. These include kings fighting for power, fragile alliances, betrayals, and wars. Many scholars believe this section describes real historical struggles between ancient empires, especially 2 that ruled after Alexander the Great. One based in Egypt called the Ptolemies, and one based in Syria called the Seleucids. These kingdoms battled for control of the land where God's people lived. One of the rulers, Antiochus Epiphanes, would brutally persecute the Jews and desecrate the temple. But then the focus zooms out. The vision shifts to something much bigger. The end of time. Daniel hears about a time of great distress, worse than anything before, but then comes hope. The angel says, quote, multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. That's Daniel chapter 12, verse 2. This is one of the clearest mentions of resurrection in the Old Testament, and it's followed by a beautiful promise, quote, those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. That's chapter 12, verse 3. Like any of us might, Daniel wants to know, how long will it be before all this happens? The answer, a mysterious one. Time, times, and half a time. and that phrase is often interpreted as 3.5 years. Then 2 more time frames are given: 1,290 days from the time the temple is desecrated, and 1,335 days with a blessing for those who wait until the end. These numbers are debated and unclear, but the bigger message is not. Even if we don't fully understand it, God's plan leads toward justice and restoration. The vision ends with peace. Quote, "Go your way until the end. You will rest, and then at the end of days, you will rise to receive your allotted inheritance." Unquote. That's Daniel chapter 12, verse 13. This final promise to Daniel of resurrection, rest, and reward is the same hope offered to all who remain faithful, even when life feels uncertain, even when evil seems to win. Daniel reminds us God sees, God knows, and his purposes will not fail. As we close this series on the book of Daniel, we step back and see the bigger picture. The book has 2 parts. The first 6 chapters are episodes from Daniel's life, faithful living in a foreign land, and the last 6 are visions of the future, strange, powerful, and often unsettling. At first glance, they may seem like 2 different books, but they carry the same message, one that speaks straight to anyone trying to hold on to their faith in a culture that pushes against us. Here's what Daniel wants us to know. Yes, the world can be terrifying. Yes, evil can look like it's winning, but God is still in control. And in the end, he will win. And more than that, you can thrive right where you are, even in exile, even under pressure, even when faith feels lonely. That's the gift of this book. Its purpose isn't just to predict the future, it's to comfort God's people in the middle of the mess. He says, yes, it's real, but God is more real. Stay faithful even now. Join me next time when we'll meet another prophet who also lived in exile, Ezekiel. It's strange, powerful, and deeply moving. Thanks for listening to Bible Basics Podcast. If this episode helped you understand the power of apocalyptic writing in Daniel, share it with a friend who's starting their journey with the Bible too. Until next time, keep reading, keep seeking, and keep growing in your faith.